Welcome to another edition of Dark Days Dawning podcast. I am your host, Michael Mulvihill, author of Hypnosaga, A History of Hypnosis. Today, I would like to talk about undue influence, narco hypnosis, and how that was practiced in the cult of the family. Interest in undue influence is especially prevalent in contemporary discourse. We live in an age that is marred by this information, especially on the dark web. Never before has critical thinking been so vital as a skill to counter this reality hazing, which is a threat to people, society, and democracy. We may establish a belief that hypnosis, hypnotherapy, psychotherapy plays no role in psychological coercion, manipulation, and menticide. After all, are they not so beneficial to human beings and so ethical? That's not the whole story. I think that we should examine this more thoroughly. By the way, the word menticide means death of the mind. It's just another word for brainwashing. And now let me talk about the family cult. The leader of the family cult was Anne Hamilton Byrne. She was born in 1921 and she died in 2019. She ran an incredibly infamous cult called the Family in Australia. She used mass deception in her work. The tools of that mass deception was narcotics, hypnosis, and psychological therapeutic techniques, alongside bribery to control and manipulate her followers. Anne Hamilton Byrne had cult members who were very high in societal status, such as medical professionals. She therefore had access to powerful drugs, including benzodiazepines, Valium, LSD, and antipsychotics, to induce altered states of consciousness in members, including children. She would have accessed drugs by psychiatrists who gave her those drugs, which were obviously there in the psychiatric hospitals. She was given LSD, for example, and she used that in controlled spiritual sessions, where I may add, she was recording these sessions so she could actually use these as tools of bribery against the people she was recording, who would spill out their darkest, most inner, most personal, most private secrets to her, because that's what she was seeking for. So I want to tell you that people who say that hypnosis and hypnotherapy is all about what the client does and it's not directed by the therapist, that's not true. Psychotherapy and hypnotherapy is an extremely directive hetero-suggestion, hetero-hypnosis, hetero-hypnotherapeutic based practice. In other words, the therapist is leading and they are guiding the patient. The objective, as far as Mary Hamilton Byrne was concerned, not Mary, sorry, that's just a slip of the tongue. The objective of her work was to break them psychologically, to break their sense of reality and make them more suggestible to her undue influence. She would have used, for example, tranquilizers and sedatives. Tranquilizers and sedatives were used to keep members docile. Children were drugged with Mogadon, a sedative, and Thorazine, an antipsychotic, to keep them compliant, and obviously to waver any chance of there being any rebellion. She was also conscientious of that being a possibility. To recap, Linda Hamilton Byrne deployed narcotics such as LSD, sedatives, and tranquilizers to help shape and coerce mentality and mindset, to ease off any threat of rebellion and to facilitate conformity by enhancing dependency on the leader. Anne Hamilton Byrne conjoined hypnosis with psychological techniques with these powerful drugs. That's nothing new to the topic of hypnosis. Of course, indigenous societies were habitually conjoining drugs with trance, it would be circuitous to go too deeply into that. Now, as medicine developed out of the Middle Ages, we got psychiatry, Pinnell being the father of psychiatry. So come the 1960s, when Anne Hamilton Byrne, when her cult started to be active, I can tell you there was a long history of narco hypnosis, which I should go into. In World War I, doctors experimented with barbiturates like sodium amytal, combined with regression-based hypnotic techniques to help patients recall traumatic events. In World War II, a truth serum, sodium pentothal, was used with hypnosis to treat battle fatigue and hysterical paralysis. By the 1950s and 1960s, narco hypnosis was used by the CAA MK Ultra program for interrogation and brainwashing. Civilian psychiatry also used drugs like sodium amytal, LSD, and scopolamine. That was used in conjunction with psychotherapy, regression therapy, and hypnosis-assisted treatments. So absolutely, Anne Hamilton Byrne used psychiatric drugs with hypnosis, with psychotherapy, to exploit members of the family cult. Byrne also recorded people's darkest confessions, like I told you, with the help of her drug-induced regression. And these, of course, were purposes of controlling and maintaining membership. If you dared to leave, she would spill the beans and make your life a complete misery. So basically, where we are is that the standard narrative of hypnotherapy is that it's safe, it's secure, and that's true. But we absolutely must allow for a thorough investigation of this concept of menticide or death of the mind, which was coined by Juice Verlew. It's an extremely serious concept. In hypnosis, narcotics and therapy techniques, when misappropriated enough, they can explain somewhat how menticide and mass menticide can occur, especially in the 1960s with the conjoining of the sexual revolution and counter societal values. You had an upturn in social norms and mores shifting towards the radical end of things. Pervasively had rebellious youth leaving their nuclear family of origin, perhaps as ferals or seekers of alternative spirituality, or simply looking for a solution to seemingly immutable problems, or fleeing unhappy familial circumstances. In increasing numbers, they found New Age religious movements, NRMs, and cults to join. More specifically, when we talk about menticide, we talk about a vast discrepancy between the young adult who would have entered these organizations and how they were perceived when meeting their families maybe a year or two later. The vocabulary that ordinary people use, I'm only talking about ordinary people, to describe their child that had emerged from these groups, is that they felt their child was brainwashed, that they were hypnotized, and the people who they joined were all mass hypnotized by these leaders. Even if psychologists are not enamored with words like brainwashing, and hypnotists don't like the use of hypnosis being an involuntary thing, this got the ball rolling in terms of explaining the level of coercion and manipulation that we see in abusive relationships, bullying, cultic groups, and of course authoritarian power structures. We found scholars of cults developing a new vocabulary using words like gaslighting, coercion, manipulation, love bombing, disfellowing, etc., to describe what goes on in these cults, which are viewed as being led by charismatic people, where the dark triad personality, Machiavellianism, narcissism, antisocial personality reigns over the members of the cult, because obviously the charismatic leader of the cult has these traits of the dark triad personality. What role hypnosis and hypnotherapy features in all this, I will leave to cult study scholars. But we can register for sure that it wasn't just one cult, but innumerable cults have used and misused substances, their members, and basically the powerful hierarchy of the cults have extrapolated, using hypnotic and psychological techniques, information which can be used to abuse cult members. And this really sits so sorrowfully with me, because hypnosis and psychotherapy is really meant to be a beneficiary of mankind, to coin that phrase. It's not something that's supposed to be used against human beings. Thank you so much for listening to the Dark Days Dawning podcast. We'll talk some more on a later occasion about other such dark topics. But bye for now.